Here we are on our final drive of season 5. Drive. Oh, that was a good rhyme, wasn't it?
It was a rhyme.
And then we're never going to drive again, ever. This is it.
I'd be okay with that.
I'd actually really like to never drive again because right now in LA, the 10 is shut down at part of it. Like, the 10 is like the biggest artery highway in this. Anyway, it's bad stuff. It's
taking us a lot longer to get to where we're going today than it would before the 10 got burnt down. So Chris, let's talk a little bit about where we are going today.
Well, Kayla, I have sort of a deep question for you since this is our last episode of the season. Where do podcast seasons go when they die?
It's a morbid question. I didn't think so much of it as dying as ending, but I guess those are similar things. And it's interesting that you asked that question because for us today, we actually return to whence we came. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. This season of Culture Just Weird, Season 5, we are actually returning to where it all began, the Philosophical Research Society.
So is that the ashes or the dust, or is it both?
It's all a cycle. We're bringing it back around. The activity we are going to today is taking place within the walls of the Philosophical Research Society. I thought it would be nice and thematic if we put this season to rest where it was born.
As long as I get cake. Hi, Kayla.
How do you feel about death?
I don't care for it. I vote no.
Second question. How do you feel about me asking you that?
I feel like there's going to be a topic today involving death or feelings about death. Or is it a death cult? What's a death cult?
I don't really know.
You hear death cult all the time. What does that mean?
I think it means that the end goal is mass death, I guess.
Oh, so is Jonestown? Is that a death cult?
Heaven's Gate.
So are we doing one of those finally?
No.
Oh.
We'll get to that, actually. First, we should introduce the show. This is Welcome to
Cult or Just Weird, final episode of season 5.
Here we are. This is Kayla. I'm a television writer.
I'm really sorry that I sang that. I wish I hadn't.
You're still going.
Chris is me, and I'm a game designer and sometimes data scientist.
Welcome to the season finale. We're so excited that you're here with us. This has been an interesting season. It's been different than our previous seasons in that we've had fewer episodes.
I am just thinking about how I wish I didn't sing that.
Yeah. Do you want to do it again?
No.
You can redo it.
No, it'll be funny.
We've had fewer episodes, but we've basically gone and had an experience along with every episode. So we've just been grateful to have you all along on that journey with us.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone, for journeying with us. And especially thank you to our patrons, including a new patron since last episode. Thank you to Tiny for supporting us. It means a lot, as it does for every one of our Patreon supporters.
If you'd like to support the show, go to patreon.com/culturejustweird. If you want to talk about the show to other people who are weird enough to want to talk about the show, you can hit up our Discord, which there's a link in anywhere you find us.
Show notes is probably the easiest one.
Okay. Are you ready? Are you ready to get into the episode proper? Do you have any other banter?
Am I prepared to die?
Are you?
No. I guess some people are. I don't know. What's the topic?
Before we get to the topic today, I want to have a little discussion with you. It
sounds like a pretty big discussion, actually.
A mini salon, if you will.
I will only if you don't say salon.
Salon, like I'm Frasier. So I have some questions to help facilitate that, okay?
Okay.
But also, really quick, you might be wondering why I have these plates
that you're bumping into the microphone.
Well, I wanted the sound of it. Why we've got plates with cake.
Yes.
Here, I'm handing this to you. Make some noise with your plate.
Yeah.
My plate.
So I can eat the... Here, first is the pretend noise part.
That doesn't sound like anything. Just please stop doing that. You do.
And then I will
this.
eat... is that how you... Okay. But then I actually want to eat some of the cake.
So we're actually going to eat cake while we talk. Probably just have a little bite right now and then don't...
I already had my bite.
Don't chew and talk. But the point is, cake is here.
So there's cake involved as well. I think it might be funnier if I chew and talk, though. Like, if I, do, especially if it's, an exaggerated, all right, Kayla, what are we talking about today?
I don't want that. It would be funny, though.
It's too late.
So, okay. Got our cake.
Eating it, too.
Got our questions. Let's get back into it. How do you feel about death?
Wait, did you poison me with this cake? Is this Kool-Aid cake?
Get prepared. Be prepared. No, it is not. It's not Kool-Aid cake. This is just normal cake. It's regular cake.
Okay,
the cake
all right.
is not a lie.
Okay. Well, it tastes good. I don't feel great about death still. The answer remains the same.
How do you cope with your fear or anxiety about that?
Big questions at the top of the show here.
Yeah. It's real life.
I don't really cope super well with it most of the time.
What do you do? Do you just ignore it? Do you pretend it's not going to happen?
Yeah, I think on a day-to-day basis, it just, there's sort of just a blind spot for it where I just I am not thinking about it. And that's how I kind of just go through my day-to-day, is not thinking about it. Sometimes, of course, I do think about my own mortality, and sometimes I can do that in a calm, sober way. And then sometimes it just freaks me the fuck out. And then I have to sometimes I can really spiral on it and think about the finality and the nothingness, and and then I have to really, should we trigger warning this for people? Cause I can get pretty freaked out sometimes.
Yeah. I
don't want people to get freaked out. So we're going to be talking about death today in case that wasn't clear.
I can get, sometimes, I will lay in bed at night and I'll start thinking about how little time there is left, quote unquote. Even if I'm lucky enough to live a quote unquote live out my natural life cycle. If I don't die as a result of an accident or illness, if I die of old age,
blaze of glory,
it still feels oh God, there's not enough time. And then I think about the time left with my loved ones, if they're also lucky enough to die of old age. And I'm well, that's not enough time either. And I can just lay in bed and I get, I have physical sensations in my body. It's so anxiety inducing. There's a specific kind of hot inside my body that is reserved for, I am ruminating on my anxiety around my mortality and the mortality of my loved ones. And not in the fear of the afterlife kind of way, but in a fear of, there's not enough time. There's not enough time. There's not enough time. And then I'll think about the fear of the afterlife or the finality, and it's that's a whole other thing.
That's a whole So I normally wouldn't bring this up, but since this is an episode where we are apparently talking about death and we have appropriately given warnings, there is this sort of semi-bleak but also informative way of thinking about time with loved ones that another data scientist back when I was working at Blizzard shared with me at one point. I don't even know why. It was I was friends with this guy, but I don't even know why he was talking about this. Whatever. Anyway, the interesting bit is that if you actually track, if you think about the amount of time that you spend with your loved ones, especially ones that are medium to very distant.
Right.
It's not even I have 40 years left with my loved ones if I live out a normal lifespan.
Right.
But the amount of time you actually spend with them is intermittent.
Right.
So it can actually be somebody actually made a chart, basically, is the idea of this is if you spend, 2 days a week hanging out with your parents for lunch, then you will have another 6 months hanging out with your I don't know what the exact numbers are, but the times are shockingly small.
I personally, I've seen that analysis elsewhere, and I personally don't care for it.
Yeah, I don't
and
either.
I not that I care for it because I can't handle it kind of way. I think that it's a false. I think it is a false like quantifying of what it means to quote unquote spend time with your loved ones.
Right, because I'm not like when I'm spending time with my loved ones, it's not like, all right, we're staring at each other the whole time and I'm not sleeping or pissing.
Well, we're also spending time with our loved ones, like especially us now in this like we're extremely connected kind of society. Like we're spending time with our loved ones even if they're 3,000 miles away from us. Like texting is
Right.
part of that. Emailing, video calls, Skype calls. Even just I think there's a difference between knowing you have access to a loved one versus like they're dead and you can't. Like that's a different that's not like, oh, I only have 6 months with them. That I think that's a false like way to quantify what it means to, oh, I only have 40 years left with so-and-so alive.
I don't think it's like, I don't think there's like any sort of like fundamental truth to it. I think it does help illuminate a little bit though, the limited time that we do have on Earth. Sometimes I cope a little bit better, I guess. Sometimes I am able to think about death without getting too freaked out. Like, I don't know, right now I kind of feel all right about it.
Oh, I'm freaking out.
Are you freaking out right now?
A little bit.
I will let you know if I get there because there's definitely like like you said, like a hot inside sort of like, oh my God, at some point there's going to be nothing.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think ultimately though, I don't really have this is something that I don't know if I'll ever have a great pithy answer to. Like, I don't know if I'll ever have like all right, so here's how you think about death. Okay. Like, I don't think I'll ever have that.
Right. I think I've talked about this on the show before, but like when I was in high school or something, I read in a textbook about like death and dying that like most people when they like are on their deathbed, like don't have any regrets about or like have very few regrets about their life. And I know I've talked about this on the show before and I'm like, I will never fact check that because I need to believe it. That's like my religion. I have faith in that because I need to think that because like, as I get older, I'm realizing like there is so much I'm not going to get to in this life. There is so much I'm not going to get to.
Dude, I know.
And that's got to be okay.
I know. It has to be.
Yeah. It has to be.
And
I'm not old. I'm young. And I'm very, very aware. There's even more than I am like aware of, I'm not going to get to.
You're old enough to have back problems randomly.
Yeah. Slept on the mattress wrong.
Yeah, no, this may be going a little tangenty, but I do think that we place a weirdly powerful emphasis on what we think about regret-wise on our deathbed. Like, that's a very specific situation.
Right.
Right? Like, our lives comprise of a multitude of moments, and only one of those moments is me on my deathbed.
Right.
So, like, is what I regret or what I wish I had done or what I hadn't done or whatever, is that important? Like, yeah, it is, but it's also not like the be all and end all. Like, we also have to consider how we feel in our everyday lives as well. It's not all about, I think, like, oh man, I regretted that I never visited Korea. Actually, I will really regret that. That's a bad example. But you get what I mean.
I mean, yeah, it's like the moment of death is so important and profound and also like nothing compared to the length of life.
Yeah.
I think that's a good point. What legacy would you like to leave behind?
Jeez,
after
dude.
You die?
I don't know. Like, I would like to have a giant pyramid built in my name.
God, same.
That will last thousands and thousands of years. You ever hear a quote about the Great Pyramid? This is my favorite quote about the Great Pyramids. I got this from, I don't know if it's real. I think it's real, but I got it from Civilization when you build the pyramids.
No, what is it?
One of the Civ computer games. It's man fears time. Time fears the Great Pyramids.
Ooh, that's very good.
Isn't that good? Suck it, time.
Would I want that to be my legacy? Would I, because I do think about that specifically with like the ancient Egyptians. And like, you and I went and saw like that museum, that traveling museum exhibit of King Tut.
Yeah.
And like, I remember them talking about in the exhibit, like, oh, like there has never been a time where like King Tut's name has not been spoken. Like he's the most famous man, his legacy is like never ending. And I'm like, is that good or bad?
Yeah, they dropped the other famous quote, which is the 2 deaths quote, right? Like you die your first death when your body dies.
Right.
And you die your second death when nobody ever speaks your name again.
And like, maybe it's good to become nothing at some point. And like, obviously King Tut will become nothing at some point. Like even if we're still talking about the heat death of the universe, eventually that will blink out too. And it's like, he'll be gone and dead.
Yeah.
But I just wonder if like, is that if I had the choice of like, sharing in the ritual and experience of death that like, 30 billion other people have experienced in versus like having that kind of legacy, which one would I pick?
Yeah, I can't lie and say that legacy isn't something I've ever thought about or wouldn't be important. Like I do have some desire to be remembered or important in some way, but at the same time, it's never been like a huge thing for me. And I think it's because of kind of what we were just talking about, like death, like the death of your legacy is also inevitable.
Right.
So a legacy just kind of feels like, I don't know, overtime. It's like there's like regular time when I'm alive, and then my overtime is like my legacy, but eventually that ends too. So it really just kind of feels like an extra period of time.
Right.
But then all fades to dust regardless.
What do you think happens after you die?
This is too profound for 6 o'clock on a Saturday.
6:25. What do you think happens after you die? Like, really, what do you think happens to you, to like your soul, your consciousness? What do you think happens?
Is this like a gun to my head scenario? Because that would be pretty meta.
Yeah.
What do I think happens? I don't think we have souls. I don't think that whatever we are experiencing right now persists in any way that we would recognize it. I think that something resembling consciousness is not impossible, but in some like weird, like, because here's the thing, I'm already like just a bunch of atoms like stuck together as meat that thinks I'm conscious when I'm not.
Right.
And we already think of consciousness, neurologically speaking, as like an illusion. So I don't know why there couldn't be another illusion when I'm no longer stuck together as Chris meat. Maybe when I become one with the universe, when my atoms disperse again, maybe there will be some sort of consciousness at the universal level. I don't know, but I kind of feel like that's also wishful thinking. Me, I'm a materialist. Like I don't think there is anything after we die. But here's the thing though, like sometimes so here's when I'm at my healthiest thinking about death is when I acknowledge that it's not a curse, but a gift. Like true infinity, true immortality is the only thing that's worse, I think. The thought of not being able to have an end to something.
Right.
Is hell.
I mean, supposedly it's what the gods envy of us, right?
Yeah. And I think that, you hear a lot of like, oh, well, it's, death makes life so much sweeter because it's limited in time. And I think that's true. It's always felt a little cheesy, but I think it's still true. But on the same side of that coin, though, is I just don't think that living truly forever would be a great experience for anyone. I think it would be terrible. Like I hate to say like, oh, go watch The Good Place, but like
Why?
they answer that question, or they deal with that question, I think, pretty deftly with what ends up happening on that show. Yeah.
If reality could be what, like, if the reality of death could be what The Good Place depicts, like, that would be heaven. That would be the dream.
Right. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with radical life extension, cool. Permanent life extension, not good. Like an ideal world for me would be everybody actually chooses when they get to die.
So, What we just did was kind of a slice. See what I did there?
I barely had time to eat any of this because I was just yapping.
A little slice of our topic today. For this episode, we're talking about death cafes.
So is this a death? Are we in like virtually or really like because we have cake and I'm actually drinking your coffee right now?
Well, my next question was, but what are death cafes, you might ask, which is what you are asking.
That's essentially what I'm asking.
We will head to the About section at deathcafe.com to learn more.
Are they going to be able to tell me what happens after death?
We'll get to that.
Nobody knows. That's
Nobody
the
knows.
thing. Nobody
it's
truly
like going
knows.
through a black hole.
Like the only truest, it's like going through a black hole. The only
information cannot come back.
Yeah.
Unless you're Dr. Gary Schwartz and you have your soul phone.
Oh, well, yeah.
God. Quote, at a death cafe, people, often strangers, gather to eat cake.
Okay.
Drink tea.
Nailed it on the cake thing.
Drink tea and discuss death.
Whoops, I'm drinking coffee.
Our objective is to increase awareness of death with a view of helping people make the most of their finite lives. A death cafe is a group-directed discussion of death with no agenda, objectives, or themes. It is a discussion group rather than grief support or counseling session, end quote. How does that sound to you?
I think that a place to talk about this stuff sounds pretty good.
Yeah, it feels like there's just not a lot of venues to talk about death. Like, obviously it features heavily in like religion and spirituality, but I'm not going to lie, a lot of the religion and spirituality that I've been exposed to, yes, it talks about death.
That's why...
But it doesn't talk about like mortality.
That's why Dia de los Muertos fucking rules. That's why it's the best holiday of the year.
I would also argue that Dia de los Muertos, which I love and
the fuck
agree
out
with
of
you,
here with whatever you're about to say.
Provides a framework that our loved ones are still around in a material sense. And like, I think about Christianity and it provides a framework of like, oh, we're going to beat death by having eternal life. Or I think about like some of the spirituality we've talked about on this show. And it's like, I'm either going to like reincarnate or I'm going to be one with the universe, or I'm going to like annihilate the self and become one with everything. I don't feel like I've run into a lot of spirituality that grapples with the idea that what if death is the end? And I'm not saying that this is like what's being solely addressed here. I'm just saying there's not a lot of venues to talk about like what happens if we die and then we're dead. Yeah.
My understanding, and I don't know very much, but my understanding is at least of the more famous religions, I think Judaism does that. I think a lot of
when you die, you're dead.
Jews believe that, there is no afterlife, and they grapple with that and their rituals. But please correct me if I'm wrong on that. I think that that's the case. And I will also say, sorry, one more thing. Regarding Dia de los Muertos, I think my feeling from it is less that it's trying to conquer death. Like it feels less like a lol JK heaven, or like, don't worry, you'll reincarnate. Like it feels less like that and more like it's less about what happens after you die and more about giving comfort to living people by allowing them to feel togetherness with their loved ones who are no longer here.
That's a good point. And I'm not saying any of this to denigrate or say that it's like wrong of religion to talk about or consider or have a framework for an afterlife. I only bring it up because, we say things like, oh, there's not a lot of venues to talk about this. And there are some kind of mainstream venues to talk in a specific way about death, but there's not a lot of venues to have like a freewheeling conversation that like maybe grapples with death in a way that isn't like prescribed by a faith or something like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And like the tea and cake thing is kind of clever. Like
it's not dissimilar to Dia de los Muertos.
It like casualizes it. Yeah.
And Dia de los Muertos obviously is like more celebratory, but like it involves food and booze and like making a party out of it. And having, this specifically, you're supposed to have tea and cake because it normalizes it. It adds an air of like, no, this is casual. This is a conversation.
Well, I'm done with my cake. So like, can we wrap this up so I can go get another slice of cake?
So part of why I wanted to talk about death cafes in our finale episode is because it feels like there's something connective here. Like we've talked about so many different groups this season and in the past 4 seasons, obviously, that often use things like fear of death to gather followers or provide answers surrounding the nature of death to do the same. And so I'm thinking of things like, like we mentioned, the Hare Krishnas offer a way out of karmic cycles and into a beautiful afterlife, or Dr. Gary Schwartz, that's my second reference for him.
He offers
today,
a phone.
His cell phone project,
which is to this day one of the best episodes of Cult or Just Weird.
He sells people on a quote-unquote scientific method to communicate with their dead loved ones, like the...
Asterisk, he is lying.
It also made me think about how some of these groups offer a place to talk about taboo subjects that you can't really talk about anywhere else. And it's like, if you feel that need, you can attract followers. So specifically, obviously, Teal Swan and her method of like straightforwardly talking about suicide and suicidal thoughts and suicidal ideation.
We did a whole episode on like the destigmatization of talking about suicide because of Teal Swan's ability to kind of crack that barrier.
So I was moved to hear that a place like Death Cafe exists, like a casual, secular, not-for-profit, decentralized collective of groups that provide a space to talk about our fears around the taboo subject of death. In short, much like that episode about suicidality was called The Antidote, I wonder if death cafes offer an antidote for some of what drives us to seek out the high control or toxic groups, you and I might end up labeling as cults on our show.
Yeah. Like one of the overarching themes of the show is these high control groups, these cults, these abusive places fill a need, and there might be better ways to fill that need. It sounds like Death Cafe is one of those things that could maybe fill this need to be able to talk about this kind of thing, but in a healthy instead of a toxic environment.
You got it. Before we get too deep into it, I know that we're like a half an hour in. Let me...
Before we get too deep into it, we're like twice as long as most podcast episodes.
I want to give a little background on how Death Cafes got started.
Okay.
Again, from deathcafe.com, quote, "The Death Cafe model was developed by John Underwood and Sue Barsky-Reed based on the ideas of Bernard Kretatz." Who is Bernard Kretatz?
I don't know.
Let's get into it. Born in 1938, Bernard Kretatz was a Swiss sociologist and ethnologist educated at the University of Geneva who studied funeral rites and customs, along with his wife, anthropologist Yvonne Preiswerk. But perhaps his most well-known, at least in the mainstream work, came about
that husband and wife team would have had a killer podcast. They would have had a better podcast than us.
They should have made a podcast. Unfortunately, Yvonne died in 1999, which is before the era of the
advent
podcast.
of,
Bernard's most well-known mainstream work came about as a result of his wife's death. When she died in 1999, Kretatz developed the idea of café mortels, which were casual gatherings in restaurants to discuss one topic, death.
Mortels.
The first Café Mortel took place in 2004 in the Swiss town of Neuchâtel, and word began to spread. Kretatz began hosting more and more and even began inviting others to host. He once said during an interview, quote, "By talking about death and dying all the time, you prepare yourself a little for your own death, which means you're not terrified of it. It's perhaps a way of facing it, as in the past we dared to look it in the face, but death will always remain a taboo, a fundamental enigma." End quote.
I think I agree with that. Although don't some like people have near-death experience, like they come back or whatever. So do you think they have like a window? You know what? This sounds like a whole other episode. Never mind. It's like, you don't know because you can't come back from it. But like some people are like dead for 2 minutes or whatever.
Yeah, I don't know. I just had surgery and I went under and I was like, am I the same person?
I never know.
Never know.
Le Petit Mort. It's every single night we die the little death.
I thought Le Petit Mort was...
Was it?
Was orgasm.
Oh, hold on. No, now I need to look this up. Hold on.
Le Petit Mort is an orgasm.
Okay. I looked this up. It's somewhat ambiguous. Modern usage of you're correct. In modern usage, that's the main thing is that you won. Le Petit Mort refers to the brief loss or weakening of consciousness in the post-orgasm sensation.
Okay, so if Le Big Mort, is that just
Le Big?
Does it feel really good? Does dying feel like
that's
a
if
big,
you have multiple
humongous
orgasms.
orgasm?
Yeah.
Sounds fine to me.
But I did see here that there is like sort of archaic usage, there's a biblical and even older saying that sleep is the little death.
Okay, so you were just referencing the biblical.
So I was referencing, whereas you were just horny.
Well, that sounds right. Okay. Eventually, Bernard Crétaz would be known among some as, more French, l'homme qui porte la mort, the man who carries death. Crétaz hosted more than 100 Café Mortels across Switzerland and even traveled to Paris in 2010 to host one. An article appeared in The Independent about this event and was read by John Underwood, who was living in London at the time, and he took the idea and ran with it, developing it into the current iteration of death cafes. Cool. Bernard Crétaz died at age 84 in 2022. But
that was like yesterday.
It's like recent, yeah. It's a fairly, new phenomenon.
I didn't know that. But I guess you just said it.
I just said it.
Now I do.
This Café Mortel experiment that he ran now spans the globe. John Underwood held his first death cafe in Hackney, London in September 2011, facilitated by Susan Barsky-Reed, a psychotherapist, and John's mother.
Oh.
I love that.
They did a mother-son business time?
It's not a business.
It's not a business.
It's a not-for-profit. It's simply just a thing.
They just did something for the good of doing it?
Yeah.
Pfft, losers.
While death cafes have no formal staff, John and Susan produced a guide to running your own death cafe in 2012, which was soon picked up in the US and allows essentially anyone, anywhere who would like to host a death cafe to do so for themselves and those in their community.
That's really cool. It's cool that it's cool they did something together.
John Underwood ran Death Cafe on a voluntary basis until June 2017. He died suddenly on June 27th, 2017, and is missed by his family, his friends, and the many, many people he touched via his work with Death Cafe. I guess that brought the mood down a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, my lack of response is the response, I guess. I don't know. That sucks.
Yeah.
But that's kind of what this seems like we're talking about, is just responding to death by saying this fucking sucks.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, in the theme of this season, you and I are, of course, going to go attend a death cafe. We're going to attend a virtual one so we can speak on this topic from a place of experience. But first, there is so much more to say about John, about Death Cafe, about how it's traveled the world, but we might do with some help in that arena. So first, I've arranged for us to sit down and have a conversation with Susan Barsky-Reed, John Underwood's mother.
Whoa.
And the psychotherapist who helped develop Death Cafe. We'll talk to her, we'll learn more about the singular project, John's legacy, and then we'll attend our Zoom Death Cafe.
I'm so glad that you got Susan Barsky-Reed herself. That's amazing.
Are you ready?
I am quite ready.
To start us off, could you introduce yourself for our audience?
Yeah, sure. My name's Susan Barsky-Reed, and I am the mother of the person, John Underwood, who started Death Cafe. And unfortunately, 6 years ago, John died. So now it's run by my daughter, Jules Barsky, and with help from me. And I usually do the interviews and talk to people because she's in her final year of training to become a doctor. So she's very busy.
That would make one busy. Yeah, for sure. We're very sorry for your loss. Obviously, this is a big part of the story of Death Cafe. How did you and your son come to kind of build this thing together?
Well, it was John's idea to start with. He was a devout Buddhist, and from what I understand, I'm not a Buddhist, but I believe that Buddhists are told to contemplate death and dying every day. And I think that influenced John, who was at the time working for the council doing town planning. He decided he wanted to do some work around death and dying. He wasn't sure what at the beginning. Then my husband was reading the newspaper one day, saw a cutting about a man called Bernard Crétaz, who's a Swiss sociologist who'd run something called Café Mortel, which is a death cafe translated into French. And Alistair, my husband, cut out the cutting, actually posted it to John and said, what do you think of this? And John said, that's what I'd like to do. So he took the idea and ran with it, gave up his well-paid job and decided to concentrate on work with death and dying, and thought that talking about death and dying would be a good way of helping people to live more fully, which is why he chose to do that. And so I'm a psychotherapist, and I was always interested in group work, so that when he said he wanted to do this, I was very keen to have a part and actually run it. And he was less keen. He wanted to be more behind the scenes. So the first death cafe he organised was in his home in London, Hackney, and it was in his kitchen. And I came down to London with cakes because I live in the northwest of England, and he was the waiter. And he'd organised with his friends several tasks that people were supposed to do in order to help them think about death and dying. We were supposed to talk about death and dying for 3/4 of the time, and for the last half an hour talk about life and living. So it was very prescriptive, and we did a lot of tasks that sadly I can no longer remember what they were, but they involved people writing things down and talking, and they burnt some pieces of paper because there was he had a coal fire in his kitchen that day. And after we'd done 2 or 3 of them, we decided that people could talk quite well about death and dying without any prompts. So we just decided it worked better to just give people the space to talk. So a death cafe starts, or should start, I don't know whether all of them do, with some rules about being respectful, turning off your phones, letting people talk.
What exactly is a death cafe? Like, what's like a succinct summary of what it is, just to kind of baseline for our listeners?
Okay. So a death cafe is a meeting that can be online or in person, where people choose to come together to talk about death and dying whilst eating cake and drinking tea or any other drink that you fancy drinking. That's what it is. That's all it is. And the thing is, people choose to go. They're not made to go. People say, is it morbid or weird or whatever? Well, it isn't. But if you don't want to go, you don't have to go. People choose to come, and it's grown enormously from when John and I did the first one in 2011. There've been, I think, are we up to 14,000 now in 85 countries?
Wow.
It's really taken off. So there seems to be a real need for it.
Yeah, I was going to ask, like, what do you think is the driving force behind the rapid growth?
I think COVID.
Yeah.
People were all of a sudden faced with a disease that, when we didn't know what it was like, it was very frightening that, if you went out, and particularly me as an older person, I was told to stay in the house all the time, because if you go out, you might catch something and die. So we were forced to actually think more about that. And I think the reason it's grown so big is because people have a need to talk about death and dying, and it's not encouraged in lots of places or with lots of people. I've got friends who say, why would people want to go to a death cafe? And that's a terrible name, somebody said to me. I think it's a really brilliant name. It's a paradoxical name.
I was just going to ask why you think that is. Like, it's so obvious when you say it. Like, we experience that too, and there's not a lot of space to talk about death. Why do you think it is such a taboo subject?
Because thinking about your life ending's frightening, and it's like you almost believe if you don't talk about it, it's not going to happen. You might live live forever. And so you don't need to think about it, so you won't talk about it, and then you'll stay alive forever. But in fact, that every single one of us is going to die. It's the only thing we've all got in common, really, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah. Do you participate in your own death cafes? Like, do you go to Death Cafe as a participant?
No, I haven't, and I don't run very many now, because of grief, really, because I'm grieving still for John, and
right.
It makes me sad to do it, because we did a lot of them together, and it was such a wonderful experience for me to work with my son and do this very life-affirming thing that when he died, I didn't do any for a really long time, and I've done 2 or 3, I think, now since he died, but I'm still raw.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
What was John like? If you can share a little bit, just I'd love to know more about what he was like.
He could be.
If that's something you want to talk about, we also don't have to.
I love talking about him. He was a brilliant father. He's got 2 children that are now 16 and 13. And he was a stay-at-home dad, because Donna, his wife, went out and earned the money because he was doing Death Cafe and not earning any money at home. So he looked after the children, and he was a great dad. He said it was a privilege. He was very kind and thoughtful. He could get very angry and be quite sharp at times if you got on the wrong side of him. But we got on really well. He was very political, left-wing political, had a great interest. He'd studied philosophy, politics and economics at university, and particularly loved the politics. And whenever anything happens, I really wish he was here to ask him, what do you think about that? Because he had such wonderful ideas about things and such insight. He was very bright. As are all my children, I'd better say, because I've got 2 others. He was clever. He didn't always work to the best of his abilities. When he was a child, he was quite independent and not always compliant. So bringing him up could be a bit of a struggle at times, because his dad and I split up when he was 8, I think. So I brought them up. I had 2 boys then. Jules was a late addition. So I brought him and his brother up on my own, more or less. It wasn't like nowadays where you have shared care, So
yeah.
So and he was quite a rebellious teenager. But when he got to about 18, he all of a sudden became a person that you'd want to spend time with, and he was lovely. He went away. He did a gap year and went to Israel. I don't know whether that's contentious or not, but we're a Jewish family, so that was something he did, and went and volunteered on a kibbutz for 6 months or so, and that. When he came back, sort of went off as a boy and came back as a man, between finishing school and going to university. That's what he did. And after that, he was a great person to be with. Really good company and fun. And he could be very funny.
What brought him to Buddhism?
It seems to me he was always looking for something. We used to go away to these holidays where you studied things, like light things. And one, he went to do the supernatural, because I think he was trying to, he was only about, 16, in a group of adults who sort of adopted him. And I think he was just looking for a religion or a meaning to life. And Buddhism gave gave him that meaning. And he actually went to work in the Buddhist centre where he studied for a while as the centre manager, and became very good friends with Geshe Tashi, who was his spiritual teacher and helped to run the centre, and they became really good friends. Geshe Tashi did his funeral at the Jamyang Buddhist Centre. John was on a committee to organise how Buddhist funerals could run, and his was the first one that they ran from the centre. I don't know whether they've run any since then. Yeah, does that give you some idea about him?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it gives a lot of idea, and it's amazing that you guys were able to create something that's clearly been helpful or like filled a need for so many people. That's a wonderful gift that you guys have been able to give and receive.
Yeah, I'm so proud of him.
Yeah. What have you seen in terms of the people that attend death cafes? Do you feel like they have gotten, because you mentioned the taboo, the thing behind the taboo you think is the fear, is sort of the existential fear of death, which I totally get, by the way.
Yeah.
I understand that, and I feel it too. Do you think that you've seen people, do you think they've been able to process that emotion more from attending Death Cafe, and if so, how?
Wow. I think the process probably begins at a death cafe, but it's not going to, happen in the hour and a half that or whatever that you're speaking. The death cafes that I've run, we've had different groups of people come each time, but from what I understand, other people run regular ones, and people come again and again to the death cafe, and I think that's how they may process it. It's difficult to know because the people that I've seen have passed through, and some people have said they'll come again, but nobody actually has in my experience, to the ones that I've run. Maybe it's something about the way I do it. I don't know.
Have you seen different, because like across the world, and we're talking about Buddhism, and you've talked about your heritage with Judaism. There's different ways that different cultures think about death and the afterlife. Do you see that with the people that participate in Death Cafe? Like, there's Christians who believe in like a heaven and hell, and there's Buddhists who may believe in reincarnation, and there's other beliefs where there's just nothing after death. Like, do you see a wide variety of that?
Yeah, absolutely. And lots of religious groups of all types run death cafes, as Buddhists, Christians, Jews. I'm trying to think if there haven't been other religions that I can recall. But I mean, then they're not the ones that are run by the different religious organisations are open to having different, denominations come, even though sometimes it's a religious, a person who leads a religious service running a death cafe. I don't know whether that answers your question or not.
Yeah, it does. I think I'm also I'm just kind of getting to this question that we have too, of like, does processing death, do you tend to see that be more about thinking about an afterlife, or do you tend to see that more around acceptance of the finality of death? And I'm asking you this, like, I don't know what your own personal view on death is, and you're welcome to tell me what I'm curious what it is, but do you see in the death cafes, do you see like people with a belief in an afterlife, and also people that are able to process the thoughts of the finality of death as well?
I think people who come to a death cafe are as different as the people you'd meet if you went to a restaurant and interviewed all the people who were eating dinner. I think people come for such a variety of reasons, or just out of curiosity. And some people will be trying to process death or think about it, and other people want to talk about deaths they've experienced, or that they are terminally ill, or that they've thought about suicide, or any number, because it's not just one thing. I mean, talking about death and dying sounds like there's only one topic of conversation. Well, there are thousands of different aspects to it. I went to one where there was a woman had come who made shrouds, and was talking about how she tested them out, which was that she wrapped up dead pigs and buried them, and then looked at what happened to the material after. I mean, the people who have worked in the death industry and look at the remains that come out of the crematorium. So we talked about what happens to the bones, and there are those sorts of things. There are people talking about what they want when they die. There are people talking about what they've experienced when they've watched other people die. So the actual dying, that's quite a common topic. Just so many things, and also about legacies of all different types, both, psychological and financial, and all those aspects. What happened at the one you went to?
Yeah, it's actually interesting that you're talking about how many different things can come up at a death cafe, because a lot was talked about, but I was almost surprised at how much of the conversation at that particular one ended up being about like practicalities, and talking about like just the practicalities of like seeking hospice care. And okay, well, if you have this experience, you can call this number and this person can help get you into hospice. And
they talked about the difference between palliative and hospice care. It was like
really technical almost.
Like very, like you said, practicalities, useful information for people who are going through potentially end of life processes.
As a psychotherapist, I would be wondering whether people were avoiding talking about death and dying. That's like one little bit. If that took up the whole of the death cafe, I think there's a bit of...
That's a good insight. I'm not sure. I mean, it was a lot of it. I don't think it was the whole time.
There was also, in that particular group, there was also a lot of talk of near-death experience and what that might have to teach us about the process of dying. There were a few, and I've noticed this elsewhere, not just in death cafes, that there is kind of a new movement going on right now of something called like death doulas, or like end-of-life care that is not solely relegated to the hospital. So it was interesting to have those voices in the room as well. And yeah, the conversation, after kind of having this very like technical conversation, the conversation then turned to almost the opposite of this very spiritual conversation of thinking about what death might look like, what it might feel like, what afterlife there may be, if any at all, which was I think we were a little, I guess not surprised, but it was just interesting that so much conversation was about the possible afterlife in a death cafe. And I don't know why that was surprising. It shouldn't be.
Yeah, I think it's some of it has to do with, I think, like our expectations coming into it. And I think that hearing you talk about how the topic of death is actually like, 10,000 different topics makes a lot of sense. But that was our experience. I don't know if you have any comments on that.
Well, only what I said. I suppose as a psychotherapist, I might be wanting to say a different thing than as a death cafe host. It just struck me that sometimes, I'm a Gestalt psychotherapist, and there's somebody called Polster who talks about aboutism, when you talk about something rather than your experience of it, if that makes sense. So that so you're one remove from the feelings. But I'd be questioning, I suppose, if I was hosting, whether that was my place to point that out or not. I don't know. Would depend on how I felt at the time.
So it sounds like then in general, death cafes are almost kind of, yes, there's a facilitator, but they're generally kind of run by the folks that are in attendance.
Absolutely. That's the agenda, is to be group led and not led by the person hosting, which is one of the rules. And sometimes people will say we'll talk about this, and this, and if they do, I will email them and say, no, that isn't a death cafe if you call it that. You've got to just let the group. And partly it's because people aren't confident about the fact that people will actually talk. I think they are concerned. I was asked to host one with somebody else that I did a couple of years ago, and the person running it could not allow there to be any space for silence and thinking. I think that's really, really important, that people have time to think and process, and that the host can hold the space and be comfortable with that, because it's really important. The space is as important as what people say.
Yeah, our host was very good. Our host did give space for silence, which I agree. I think that's difficult but very important. We're actually so that was on Zoom, which makes it even harder, but we are gonna attend an in-person one here in a couple days. Yeah. So if one of our audience members wanted to also attend a death cafe, what advice would you have for someone attending their first one?
Go with an open mind. Listen carefully to what people say, and be respectful of whatever anybody says, even if you don't agree. You don't have to say something if you don't want to. It's fine to just listen. That was something John and I disagreed about, because he would actually pick people out and ask them, what do you think, if they didn't say anything? And I didn't think that was what I wanted to do. Just be open to it. Go with an open mind. And actually, sometimes people laugh a lot. There is fun to be had at a death cafe, as well as tears to be shed.
And then also, I don't know if we got this in the recording, but you did recommend to us, if we attend virtually, to bring our own cake.
Oh, bring your own cake, absolutely. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, the cake is crucial.
I feel like we need to go back and do the virtual one again, just to have the cake experience.
Yeah.
I'm interested which ones you went to, which one you went to, and which one you're going to.
So the virtual one we attended was it was out of Florida, and it was, like you mentioned, a kind of a result of COVID. I think they were meeting in person and then moved strictly to virtual during COVID, and just kind of kept it that way, because that way folks from all over the world could attend, and all over the country. And we were 3,000 miles away and able to attend. And the one we're going to on Saturday, it's in Los Angeles, and it's at what do you call an organization? It's an organization called the Philosophical Research Society, which is like a very old building. And how would you describe it? It's like a research facility.
Library / community for folks who are interested in studying, or perhaps also believe in the supernatural and spiritualism and New Age type beliefs.
Different philosophies, yeah. So it'll be an interesting space for it.
Yeah. And what time of day is it?
I think it's at like 2:00.
Yeah, this one will be in the afternoon. Yeah, 2:00.
I sometimes think I should go to some other ones, but I think I should, but I haven't done it yet. But maybe the time is coming when I will.
It's just I do want to go back to something you said about how one of the reasons why you haven't attended is because grief is still very fresh for you, very raw. And they did make it clear in the one that we attended, like, this is not a grief support group. And so what are some differences there? Because like Chris and I, like we are also, just full disclosure, we also are grieving a son who did not live as long as John did not, was not an adult. He was a young baby. But I did feel a little like, oh, this is not a grief support group. I don't really have kind of like the vocabulary for what this is. I understand a grief support group, so I kind of need to go experience Death Cafe for myself to figure out what this is. So what are some differences, I guess, for people who may not know, between a grief support group and Death Cafe?
I think a grief support group is for people who want to talk about grief, and their grieving and the person that they're grieving. And a Death Cafe, you can talk about grief in a Death Cafe, but I think that is John's guideline, and I think that he thought that people who were freshly grieving or their grief was raw would be better served in a group of other people who are also grieving, rather than to go to a Death Cafe. But I've heard grief discussed many times in Death Cafes, and I'm so sorry about your child.
Thank you. Yeah, and same with John. So just kind of bringing it back to the specifics of our podcast. So we tend to talk about things that might be colloquially called cults, or a better term for that is high control groups. And oftentimes these groups we've seen will use things like the fear of death to attract followers. Or we've talked a lot about some cults or some groups like this will provide a space to talk about taboo subjects that you cannot talk about anywhere else. Like we've talked, we've had several episodes about suicide in particular. There's one high control group that will openly talk about it, and that's a way that they attract followers.
Like they fulfill a need kind of that doesn't get fulfilled elsewhere. And
so we're kind of thinking that something like Death Cafe can be an antidote to this practice. It seems like this is a communal group. This is providing a safe space to talk about something that is taboo. Can you talk about what Death Cafe, the need that Death Cafe is filling for people?
Well, John's idea was that realizing that you're going to die means that you can think about your life and enjoy it, and not. He also believed that people's acquisitiveness was about their need to put off dying, as you know, and stop thinking about it.
I think a lot of what I've been thinking about as we've been talking is just like through the years of going to therapy, I've heard time and time again of like, oh, the happiest people are the people who think about death frequently. And I think that does come from like Buddhist schools of thought or things like that. So I don't really have a question there. I think that you basically answered it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll chime in. Like I've heard the same thing. I don't know. I guess it's maybe less of a question and more of like a little bit of like a thank you for providing this space, because it's taboo. It's hard to talk about, and it's hard to talk about in a way that I think causes people to, and I'm just maybe introspecting here, but it seems like it causes people to talk about it in like a roundabout way, or to find a way to sort of like cover up that fear. I think you mentioned that with John, how he believed that like the acquisitiveness of our society is tied to that fear. Yeah. So I think that anything that gives an outlet for that is just great. It's a really good thing to have. It's a really healing thing.
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
I think we're kind of coming to the end of our questions. Would you mind if I asked what are your beliefs about death? Like, what's your relationship with death?
Well, I'm quite old, and I know that the time I've got left is much, much shorter than the time that I've had. And there are some things about my health that have made me think, oh, that's what really old people have. So, my life's getting shorter, and sometimes I push the thought away, and sometimes I think, well, that's what happens. That's what happens when you get old. Actually, you die. And what happens after? My mum used to tell me that she would meet all her dead relatives again. And I would really like to believe that was true, but I'm not sure that it is. And John would believe that he was going to be reincarnated. I'm not sure I believe that either. And the answer is I don't know. I suspect probably, you stop living and nothing else happens, which is a bit pessimistic. But I think really at the moment, it does change though. I don't always, it's not a static thing with me. Sometimes I think, well, it'd be nice to believe some other things, but I'm not sure that I do.
That's exactly kind of where we are, and it feels like that can also, just even within the conversation around talking about the taboo of death, that can also be a taboo to talk about having feelings of there is an end, and then maybe there is not anything beyond, and it would be nice to believe that there is, but maybe there isn't. Even that can feel still difficult to bring up even in these spaces.
It's like a taboo within a taboo. It's like hard to talk about death, and then also hard to talk about one of the many ways that death could potentially manifest as, being this end is even harder to talk about. But I totally feel you on, like Kayla said, I think I feel the exact same way. Like there's different beliefs sort of surrounding me that could all be true. I'm not sure I believe any of them, but I really would like to. And then there's also a part of me that would like to be more at peace if it isn't true. So I don't know. It does, in our little like 3-person mini death cafe here, I think it helps to hear even just you kind of thinking through it that way, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So you haven't got a strong view either of you of what happens after we die.
I have this thing that I think is probably like somewhat common in that I was raised religious, so I was raised Catholic, and so up until I sort of like lost my religion, or at least I still have the cultural bit, but not really the belief bit. And when that evaporated, the safety net of the afterlife evaporated with it. And so, like the young adult and adult part of my life has been a little more of a struggle that way, because I, was used to having the safety net and now it's not there. So I don't know if it would have been easier if I was raised without that belief, or if it's just hard for anyone to think about death as being final. But I don't know. Yeah, it's I think part of why it's confusing too is because literally nobody knows, because we're all still alive, so we're all just speculating. But yeah, I don't know. I get. Does that answer your question? Maybe Kayla should also talk to herself. Give her a chance.
Yeah, I think for me, at least what I'm, you mentioned that it kind of can go back and forth or vacillate or be different on any given day. And I kind of think where I am these days is I'm trying to figure out what it means to kind of return to being one with everything, if that makes sense. Is there a way to feel like I will be reunited with my loved ones in some way, even if that is not necessarily and we're all going to be hanging out like we just were, but is there comfort can I find comfort in knowing that, we as people, we as conscious beings, we're all kind of just pieces of the universe that have become conscious and have woken up to themselves. And then one day we will return back to just simply being pieces of the universe. And I'm trying to find comfort in that, and knowing that in some way I will be one with my loved ones again. Maybe it'll be in that way. Maybe it'll be in a different way. I don't know. But it's hard to think about. It's sometimes I will lay awake at night and have to like calm myself down because I'm thinking about the inevitable reality that even if there is something beautiful, or even if there is something after death, it is still, I'm enjoying being here, and I don't necessarily want this to end. So the thought of that ending and that transition is scary, and I think that something like Death Cafe is really beneficial for folks that are having these thoughts and grappling with it. And it was nice to sit in even if a virtual room with other people who were grappling with it in I think different ways. I think there was more widespread, like, firm belief in a clear afterlife. But it was medicine to sit with other people and think about this and grapple with it.
And I think what you were saying too, like, even if it is wonderful and beautiful and whatever it is, which it may be, it's still the greatest possible change, and change is scary, and it's an unknown change. So like unknown is also scary. So it's like this big, huge change, whatever the change is, and it's unknown, which makes it quite frightening, even if it's wonderful.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you feel like we didn't cover, or a story you'd like to tell, or anything you'd like to add about Death Cafe, or your own story, or John's story?
That I didn't say that death cafes are always free, and are not meant to lead to any conclusion, or you're not sold anything, or nothing's promoted. That I always forget to say that, and that's really important as well.
It is, yeah.
That makes it such a service. And like, again, you, Chris, already said thank you, but thank you for providing this space. And it's wonderful that it's become so widespread, because it is a service, and it is filling a need that so many people do need, and a need that people need.
A need that people need.
A need that people have.
I also want to mention, like, that, by not making it have an agenda, it's its own end. It's not a means to another end. And I think that that's what would insulate something like this from being, like the high control groups that we talked about. This is a means to an end. Like, it's a means to accruing power or followers or cash or whatever for, a charismatic leader. Whereas, if there's no stated agenda, and it's not, to turn a profit, then I think you insulate yourself against that kind of thing. So that is important.
Thank you so much for chatting with us today, Susan. Are there any links you would like us to share with our audience of where they can like find you on the internet?
www.deathcafe.com. That's it. Simple.
Great. Perfect.
All right. We will absolutely share that.
Right. Thank you. And it's very good to talk to you.
So, Chris, I want to ask for your thoughts and your feelings on the interview, the virtual Death Cafe experience, and so much more. I want to ask you.
Okay. I want to answer you.
But first, I have a little surprise for you.
Ooh, was it more cake?
Yeah, actually.
Wait, what? Really?
We have one more stop to make before we're fully rounded out on the topic and can come back to process with our audience. We are now going to visit an in-person Death Cafe. It's not just any in-person Death Cafe, but this particular event is gonna help us wrap up the season nicely. Okay, so we're back in studio. for reals this time. No more surprises. We have obviously...
No more cake. I am full.
No more cake. I'm so sorry. We have a lot to talk about. We attended 2 different death cafes. We did an interview, and I don't know about you, but I have many different thoughts and feelings here. But do you want to kick us off?
Well, there's a lot. Okay, so our audience will have just recently listened to this interview that we did. They will not have any context from the death cafes that we attended. So maybe we talk about them first.
Okay.
And then we just kind of freewheel it from there. I don't know.
Yeah, so kick us off.
First and foremost, this latest one that we went to in person had cookies, not cake.
Well, it had cookies and brownies.
That's not cake, my friend.
A brownie is a cake.
Is a brownie a cake? I don't think so.
Let me look.
Get out of here. It's a confection.
It's a confection.
Oh, get dunked on.
A chocolate brownie is a chocolate-baked confection.
Yeah.
They can be fudgy or cakey.
It can be cakey. That doesn't make it a cake.
Is
you know what else isn't a
brownie
cake?
A cake.
Those fucking crepe, those layered crepe things. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Those are stacks of crepes, not a cake.
It's not a cake.
Get the hell out of here.
Get the hell out of here.
All right. So whatever. Didn't have cake, had cookies. Still delicious. They did have tea. But let's since that's the one we just did, let's go back a few days to when we did the Zoom Death Cafe. The Zoom Death Cafe it lasted about an hour and a half. It was very well moderated, I have to say, which that's a quality that it shares with the in-person Death Cafe that we went to. The moderators for both of these, what do you call it? Events? Sessions?
Cafes.
Salons?
Salon. Which somebody
good.
in the in-person cafe referred to it as like a 1920s Parisian salon. And I was like, I know.
That's what we said on the podcast. But yeah, it was, what would you say? There was like 15 people on the Zoom-ish, 15 to 20.
Yeah.
It was mostly older folks on the Zoom, which was, again, an interesting contrast to in-person. The in-person Death Cafe was, I would say, skewed much younger.
Yeah, more like
middle-aged.
30s and middle-aged, yeah.
Yeah. The Zoom Death Cafe also included, it was fascinating, included like, there were 3 or 4 students that were attending the Death Cafe based on a university class they were taking on death and dying, which I was like fascinated by. And I wish that I had either seen that class or taken that class,
right.
known of that class when I was in college.
Right.
It was cool to have them there too. But yeah, it was a sort of just like it was a group-led discussion on various topics around death and dying. One thing I will say is that, as Ms. Barsky-Reed mentioned, there are it's not just like death. It sounds like it's one topic, but it's actually like 1,000 topics.
Right.
And that definitely came through in both the Zoom and the in-person Death Cafe. And the Zoom Death Cafe, there were people talking about grief from loved ones that they had lost. There were people talking about their own fears. There was a sort of a lengthy discussion about hospital care around palliative and hospice care, which I learned a bunch actually from listening to those conversations.
Yeah, it was like very like technical and like actionable of like here's knowledge that you need for like end of life, or if you become ill or a loved one becomes ill, like here's the difference between palliative care and hospice, and
which I don't even know the difference. So palliative care, I guess the actionable thing here for you guys, ask for it, is basically the actionable thing.
If you receive a diagnosis, it doesn't necessarily have to be.
It doesn't have to be a terminal diagnosis.
It's more about like quality of life while you're receiving medical treatment to that like extensive degree. So like palliative care is available to you not only when you are actively dying. Right.
And even if it's just a consult, like it still is helpful. And then hospice care is for when you are actually, in the process of dying. There was also, I believe, there was a death doula that was present at both meetings, multiple death doulas.
I think that death doulas are frequently present, like are
in death cafes.
At death cafes, it's like I think that death cafes. Again, there's all kinds of people go to death cafes, but there are a lot of people who are like personally in end of life, are elderly people who are like death workers, so like these death doulas, and then healthcare workers who maybe deal with palliative and hospice care. I think those are some of the big populations. Yeah,
I'm not even sure I knew that there was such thing as a death doula before we attended these things, but it's fascinating. I mean, it's very similar. It sounds like very similar to a birth doula, where like you're not responsible for like, the medical pieces of it, but you're kind of responsible for support and everything else, and like guidance through the process that is like a process that is pretty fucking unfamiliar to everyone.
Right.
So the existence of that profession is very cool. What else did we talk about in the Zoom one?
So in the Zoom one, it was interesting because it almost felt like it was half this like technical, pragmatic conversation and then half a very like spiritual, like metaphysical conversation, because then the conversation dipped to things like near-death experiences, or some of the stuff that you and I talked about at the top of the show. What do you think happens after you die? What is the afterlife? What does the process feel like? And so I thought that it was interesting to see how... Yeah, exactly what Susan talked about. It's such a huge topic. So to see that play out, even on the virtual Death Cafe, which, I'm grateful that it is virtual. And like we talked about in the interview, it's virtual because of COVID, and stayed virtual because it grants greater access to more people and brings in people from all over the world into one space.
Yeah, the one we attended, we're in Los Angeles, and the one we attended was from, I think it was based in Florida.
Yeah. It was cool that our experience reflected what we then talked with Susan about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely felt group-led because someone in the group brought up the topic of palliative care and hospice care, and then someone in the group brought up the topic of NDEs, near-death experiences. The other thing I will say for both, and especially for Zoom, is that the moderator was good about allowing time for silence.
Yeah.
Like, it's so hard to allow silence to be a thing, especially in a group setting. Like, if silence happens for more than 3 seconds, like your brain just starts going, oh my God, somebody needs to talk or else I'm going to explode. But especially I think in any sort of salon type setting where you're just like thinking about stuff, I think silence is beneficial.
Right.
But then especially about something like this, I think the silence is critical, and it was really good that, like, I don't know, we were able to have some of that, and it didn't feel like people were like, gotta fill the silence. Holy shit.
Right.
We should do like 10 seconds of silence now. Just to...
Shh. No. I was also surprised at how like kind of easy it was to talk about death in the environment. Like sometimes you join a new support group and it's like it takes a little while before you can kind of like feel comfortable talking about stuff. But I didn't feel that in the virtual Death Cafe, and then I think I felt that even less in the in-person one, where it was just like, this is everybody's topic. Like this is everybody's topic.
There's no one that doesn't belong there.
Yeah. Yeah. And that can be a hard thing to feel. It can be hard to feel like that you belong to any particular group. And this is a group that you like, there's no way you can't belong. Even if you've never had somebody close to you die, you're going to die. So this is for you. Like, even if you have not experienced death, you're going to. So this is for you.
Yeah, I felt that too. It felt easier, I think, I don't know, to talk about my own experiences.
And just kind of, in keeping with talking about the in-person one, it was really cool to go back to the Philosophical Research Society and do another event there. Like, we'd kind of been talking about going back there since we went for the Source Family documentary screening and conversation with the Source Family members. And
we've mentioned it like 2 or 3 times. We definitely mentioned it last episode with the Theosophy.
Yeah.
So it's always there under the surface of like Los Angeles, esoteric. Although I wouldn't call this esoteric. Like, that's what was interesting about this too. Not to steal your thunder here, but like, I didn't get the, oh boy, this is going to get weird vibe. Right. Like, I didn't get the...
And it could have, and that could have been okay, but it wasn't like...
Yeah, it would have been okay, but that's not the vibe I got. This wasn't a place
for wizards to talk about esoteric concepts regarding death.
Right. This was like all welcoming like I think it would have been totally fine if somebody was there that was like, I'm woo woo and I think that I channel Ramtha or whatever. But the vibe I got was not necessarily like, oh yeah, this is going to turn into something like that. It was more just like open discussion and like all the people there, by the way, were like really sharp.
Yeah.
Like everybody that spoke, I was like, man, like you have just really interesting insight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've thought about this. You can articulate it well. It was a good group of people to be in conversation with at 2:00 on a Saturday.
Yeah.
And the facilitator, the host, was very, very good at what she did. And they were different. It was different than the way the virtual one was kind of hosted. And in this one, this facilitator asked follow-up questions.
Oh, her follow-up questions were so fucking good.
And they were really good. And it was,
She also did the, like, go around the circle, introduce yourself, and talk about why you're here, which we did do that on the Zoom. Mm-hmm. But it got so much more in-depth than the in-person. I'm not sure if... I feel like that was because her prompt was slightly different.
Yeah.
On the Zoom, it was more like, hi, my name's Chris. I'm here for X.
Right.
Whereas the in-person was like, hi, my name's Chris. Like... here's an experience that I've had, or here's something that I'm currently experiencing. And yeah, her follow-up questions were just like, knives is a bad word.
Just knives that sliced you up and then you died.
Bad. No, they were like,
sharp and incisive.
Cut right to the, they were very good follow-up questions.
Yeah. And I'm just grateful that there was something that like I connected to without any caveats at the Philosophical Research Society, because like, I love esotericism and I love woo and I love the occult and I love everything that is kind of present at a space like that. And also I'm aware that like it's not entirely for me. It's not entirely, I like thinking about it. I like learning about it. It's not necessarily my actual belief system. And so to be able to go to a place like the Philosophical Research Society and have an experience that did align more with my like belief system or how I think about the world in this like secular way was really refreshing.
Let's put it this way. When we were there for the Source Family documentary, I felt like an observer. When we were there today, I felt like a participant.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. There's one more thing I wanted to talk with you about, and you might have other things that you want to talk about, but I wanted to touch on this, and we did touch on it in our conversation with Susan Barsky-Reed, but I wanted to talk about it with you. One of the things that Death Cafe sets out to do is flout the taboo of talking about death.
Yeah.
But even attending these groups and having these conversations, it does still seem like there is a taboo, even when you get comfortable talking about it. Not necessarily in these groups, but like just kind of among death-centric conversations. And that seems like there's maybe still a taboo around talking about the finality of death, like we talked about with Susan Barsky-Reed. Is there anything else you want to say about that we didn't cover in the interview? Like you and I have talked about this. We've talked about it before we knew Death Cafe was a thing. And now having kind of gone and experienced it, how do you feel about this idea that it's difficult to say, I don't think anything happens after death? Like, what do you want to say about that?
Well, first of all, that was very difficult for me to say back when we were recording the intro to this episode. It felt hard for me to say what I believed, because what I believe is that.
Right.
Not even so much. I mean, a little bit, I guess, is because I am scared of it. Yeah. But it's also just because it's like, it's a bit of an information hazard, and I don't want to be just like shooting, like crappy. I don't want to be like giving our listeners crappy days by saying like, I think that the bleak nothingness awaits us all. I
also feel like it's hard to, I feel like I'm going to like hurt someone's feelings.
Yeah.
Like if somebody has a belief in the afterlife, which like you should, like I have nothing against with believing in an afterlife or life after death or eternal life, whatever your belief in that is. I have absolutely nothing against that, and I think there's a lot of
Frankly,
really great
I'm a little
things
jealous.
there. I'm quite jealous of it, but I do worry about like if I say I don't think anything happens after death, is that going to like hurt the feelings of somebody who believes differently than me? Which is like kind of like infantilizing.
It's a little infantilizing. For me, it's not so much hurt the feeling. Like, it's a little bit that, but for me, it's more, I don't want to put somebody else in the same existential crisis that I'm in.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
You know, like if somebody has like
But
a
that's
nice
why it feels
steady
like taboo.
belief, I think that is why it feels like taboo. That's what I'm saying,
It's
right?
still like it would have still been hard. I didn't say in any of these groups like, I don't think anything happens after we die, and that's because I didn't necessarily feel like super comfortable saying that.
Yeah, I think, and what was weird is this kind of feels like it's the group where you're supposed to feel okay with that.
Right.
And it's not on the group, it's on us. But what's interesting is that even in the group where it's like, no taboos here, you still can't escape that feeling of taboo.
Right.
And I think it's because of that. It's because you don't want to poop in people's oatmeal.
Right.
I don't, if people are like, when people are talking about near-death experiences on the Zoom, I don't want to chime in and be like, guys, come on, nothing happens. You know what I mean?
Right.
Nothing happens.
Right.
Like, that just feels shitty.
And you wouldn't say it like that, but it's hard to not
No, I would
feel
definitely
like...
say it like that because it's hilarious and I want to hurt people's feelings.
Well, near-death experience is also what got Dr. Gary Schwartz into his work. So
Well, yeah, that's a whole other topic.
I really have it out for that guy.
As you should. But yeah, I definitely feel like there's sort of like layers of taboo, right? There's like the first order taboo, which is like just talking about death at all.
Right.
Like, oh, I don't want to hear about so and so with cancer. I don't want to hear about the hospital. I don't want to hear about that. Whatever. Let's talk about something nice. And then there's like this second order taboo, which is like even when you're talking about death, there's like if your belief system involves the finality of it, that's even harder to talk about.
Right. Right. I'm going to say something controversial.
Oh, controversial.
Unless you were in the middle of a thought.
No, I'm always in the middle of thoughts because that's how brains work.
I don't hate hospitals. That's like such a common refrain of like,
Yeah.
I hate hospitals. I don't hate hospitals.
I have mixed feelings.
And I've experienced a lot of death in hospitals, and I've
Yeah,
experienced...
wait, why don't you hate hospitals?
This is what I'm saying. I've experienced a lot of death in hospitals, and I've experienced a lot of like needing of hospitals and like being in extreme physical peril in hospitals. And I think that's why I don't hate them. Like, I don't know how this connects back to what we're talking about, but it's just, I am comforted by the fact that there is a place where you go when you are hurt, that there's a place where you go when you are dying. There's a place where you go when someone else is dying and there are people caring for you. And there's an entire like science behind like caring for the sick and the dying and the people being born, which is, also a physical trauma. I think that the reason why I don't hate hospitals is because hospitals make this like really scary thing less scary to me. And I understand the inverse, that like hospitals make illness and death and pain more real. But it also makes it like less scary to me. Yeah,
I get that. I think that people that hate hospitals don't, I think they would agree with you that it's like, oh, good. It's good that it's there, but it sucks to be reminded that you need it, right? It's like the same reason why you don't, like, people like avoid going to the doctor because they're like, I don't want to get this diagnosis. Until I get the diagnosis, I am comfortable avoiding it. La, 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 I'm not listening.
Right.
But, that kind of goes back a little bit to the taboo. One of the things that I did want to talk about is we say a lot, oh, there's not space to talk for this stuff. We've said it on this podcast. We talked about it in the death cafes. We talked about it with Susan, just like, oh, Western society, we don't have a lot of space to talk about death. It's very much a taboo. We put it out of our minds. And I think that is true. But there's also like today when we were at the death cafe, there was this little part of like nagging part of me that was like, or is that also a cope? Is it also a cope?
I know how I feel about it. I know exactly how I think about this.
Do we just say that it's not polite to talk about and like our society has a problem with it and we've stigmatized and tabooed it? But is that 100% true, or is part of it that we say that because that gives us a feeling of power that like, well, if we could just change how society works, then we would all be like super chill with death after that.
Right.
And I just like, part of me kind of goes like, yeah, it's taboo, but I don't know if it would be like, I don't know what it would look like if we did live in a society that treated it better. Like I certainly going back to what we were saying before, I love Dia de los Muertos. I think more of that kind of stuff, it would be great. But there's also this thing that we always just come back to when we talk about this, which is like nothing takes away the fact that it sucks.
Right.
Nothing.
My grief over my kid being dead would really only like marginally be made better by living in a society where like death and grief are more openly talked about. It would make it better.
Yeah.
But like when I think about what that ocean of grief looks like, the size and gravity of that like ocean of grief, yeah, the society that I live in is just a part of it.
Yeah. Like it would make the sky look better, but the ocean would still be there.
Yeah. Which isn't to say, like, I do think that we can improve in a lot of ways. And like talking about death, I think death cafes are like materially making people's lives better.
Yeah, I don't want to, like, when I say all that, I don't mean to be like, this is all stupid too. I just mean like, I don't know what I mean, I guess. Just acknowledging that there is some like ocean that's still going to be there.
I think we can make ourselves more comfortable with death, but that doesn't necessarily mean we have to like be happy about it.
Right.
And I don't think that Death Cafe intends for you to set out to like feel good about death. I think it intends to set out for you to feel more comfortable with it.
Right. Or just like a space to talk about it because I agree. Like and just like full disclosure too, of all the groups that we've visited this season, I want to go back to this one the most. And this is the only one where I'm like, I would actually go out of my way to see where this would fit on my calendar to try to go there again.
Right. All right. So death cafes, we have covered them inside and out. There is only one thing left to do.
Determine whether it's a cult or just weird.
It's the reason we do this show, the criteria. I know that we didn't really approach death cafes. It's like, is this a cult? We approached it with the like,
is this anti-cult?
Maybe this is an anti-cult thing. But, you know, it's the finale. It's what we do. Let's go ahead and apply the criteria to death cafes and see how it shakes out, right?
Yeah, it's like we have to just like power forward with the criteria, like no matter what the situation is.
Right. Charismatic leader.
I liked Susan. I thought she was pretty cool.
I liked Susan too. I think that John sounded like...
John sounded quite charismatic.
Yeah. And...
that other guy you mentioned, he sounded cool.
I don't think that it's high on this because this is such a decentralized thing that like I would not call John or Susan or Bernard the leader. Yeah.
Like founder is different than leader.
Yeah.
Totally agree. Decentralized, charismatic leader score low.
Expected harm.
Expected help.
Expected help.
Expected thank you for making this a thing because it's very needed and I got a lot out of it.
So low. Expected harm low.
Negative.
This will not hurt you. This will only help.
Negative 100.
Presence of ritual. That's there. That's high. You got your cake. You got your tea. You got your sitting around in a circle. You got your talking about death. It's there. It's
not tremendously ritualistic because there isn't like a lot of jargon that's like...
Right, that's true.
You know, in-group jargon. Right. There's not a lot of like, we're going to say the opening prayer. Yeah, there's not a lot of... But like they do the cake and tea thing, but I think that's also
It's not like walking
helpful.
Into an AA meeting where like you said, there's like a lot of jargon and like existing things. It's just like a chat. So yeah, you're right.
We did have to stand and then kneel and then sit and then stand and then kneel.
And then I did have to like
stand.
cut my palm and let the blood drop into a fire and then like a ghastly figure appeared.
That was my favorite part.
And told me the way that I'm going to die. So that felt pretty ritualistic.
Yeah, jelly beans too, which is like, I don't even think you like jelly beans.
I don't care for jelly beans. So presence of ritual, it's there, but it's
there,
not.
but low.
Niche within society. What do you think? It's like really widespread around. It's widespread around the globe. It's expansive. There's like probably.
The reason I laugh is because it's like you could just say we're talking about death and everybody dies. It's the least niche topic we've ever done.
Yeah. What do you think? I think it's still niche.
I think it's still niche because we're talking about the Death Cafe, the event, not dying.
And like while they are widespread, I feel like I couldn't really walk down the street. Like, if I walked down the street and asked 10 people, like, do you know about Death Cafe? Probably all 10 would say no.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll say it is niche, which means if it ends up scoring, then it's a cult, not a religion.
Anti-factuality.
I don't even know how I'd apply this here. There isn't really an agenda, right? Like, there's no, like, documents. There's no The Secret Doctrine by Madame Blavatsky. Like,
right.
That doesn't exist for this. So, like, what are the facts? Like, I don't know. Like, there's not even any centralized dogma fact, which also is going to answer our dogma question.
Yeah.
But,
so
there's no logical fallacies either going on.
It's not anti-factual. It's not dogmatic. You can knock those two out.
Yeah. Low.
Life consumption. Percentage of life consumed.
Well, since you die, that's 100%.
100%. But we're not talking about death.
Yeah,
Death cafes. Yeah. They generally, I guess we didn't say this, the both that we attended meet once a month for 2 hours. Yeah.
So very, very low. They do not consume your life. They do not ask you for more. They do not. They don't ask for donations.
They do. Well, it's at least the one we attended in person. There was an optional donation of like for the ticket.
Oh, there was. Okay, but I didn't like to the fact that I'm saying this right now means that I didn't even realize that. Not solicited.
No, correct. There was not like a give us money. It was like there was less asking for money than even like going to again an AA meeting.
Right.
Chain of recruits.
Again, did not feel solicited. So
yeah,
monetary or otherwise.
They did ask us like, okay, here's, if you know anybody who wants to come, like, here's the information you can give them.
Oh yeah. They said like, here's some flyers if anybody's interested, but they weren't like, go get your downline.
No.
Or else you won't make platinum death member.
And there were people who were there who was like, oh yeah, I'm here because my friend came. And so I wanted to see what it was all about.
Oh, so there is a chain of recruits. Hey man, chain of recruits can be maybe
I don't think
thing?
There is a chain of recruits because chain of recruits generally feels more like there's like a system in place.
Yeah.
It's like either you like have kids and they go in the thing, or you like have your downline, or you like, know.
Yeah.
It just felt like regular life.
Can we give it like a small score?
Sure, it's because you want it to be there.
Like 10%.
Safe or unsafe exit?
We're all getting out of this life not alive or something, right? I keep going back to this death well
it's
for the jokes.
Cafes,
and it doesn't.
Death cafes.
Yeah, so we left and nobody got upset.
I don't think they're gonna come hound us down for if we go back or not.
Well, we didn't even leave actually. Like the meeting dispersed.
We put our chairs away and ended.
But nobody said you better come back or else you're getting shunned. So I would say completely safe exit.
So
ergo,
cult are just weird.
Just weird. And I will say, if you think maybe, it's not weird, death itself is weird.
Oh yeah.
So talking about death is weird.
Yeah. And when we say weird, again, for anybody who might be listening for the first time, weird is a
we like weird.
Celebratory term on our show. Weird means you're cool as hell.
That's right.
So death cafes.
Just
cool as hell.
Cool as hell.
Okay, before we wrap up
the season.
The entire season 5 of Culture Just Weird, we should talk about next season, because I feel like we should kind of get into how next season's focus actually brought us to this episode's topic. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Chris, to guide us through that convo.
Well, much like the fecundity of life itself, where the death of one season provides the fertilizer and the inspiration for the life that is the next season, this season's Death Cafe, and we've actually done this for 2 or 3 seasons in a row now, where the previous season's finale sort of directly led into the next season's theme, and that's true again for this. So next season, we are going to be focusing on groups, organizations, yada yada, the usual laundry list. Cults are just weirds that are oriented around death. Maybe extending life, maybe taking advantage of people's fear of death, much like Teal Swan and Gary Schwartz. Maybe groups like Death Cafe that are treating the topic with a more healthy helping hand.
I'm mostly interested in, I want to talk about people that are trying to not die. That's my big one.
We'll get to that. We will definitely get to that. So everyone, I know that it's going to be a long winter without Culture Just Weird. It always is. But we have some really exciting stuff. We've actually already visited a place. We went on a little bit of a field trip a few weeks ago and visited a place that we're going to talk about next season.
It was nuts, you guys.
It was crazy.
It was nuts.
It's just been it was.
Can I tell the story? Okay, I want to tell the story.
Great party, like cocktail party fuel.
Yeah. Oh, I've not talked about anything else with this. We went to do a topic on this place, and as we were leaving it, we went, this is too big for a single topic. This is an entire season. And you're going to have to just wait to learn what it's about. But it did bring us to the topic of like death, life extension, life after death, all of that, which brought us to wanting to talk about death cafes. So, you know, it's all goes full circle. Just like going back to the Philosophical Research Society, it all goes full circle.
It just randomly full. It is actually funny that we were like, oh, let's talk like this. Let's do this thing on death cafes because yada yada. And then there was death cafes at PRS that was like very fortuitous. But yeah, I'm super excited for next season. I hope you guys are too.
Chris, thank you for going on this journey with me, not just to the death cafes, but on this kind of new experiment for season 5, where we were able to visit all of the cults and weirds right here in our own backyard. I really encourage anybody who's listening to try this out, to see what weirds might be in your own backyard and really take the time to go visit, because we went and did a lot of things that I don't think I would have done otherwise without the framework of the podcast. And there are so many things that we were exposed to that I cannot wait to go back to. Ecstatic dance, the Philosophical Research Society, death cafes, the Theosophical Society, the Hare Krishna, it just kind of like on and on and on. I'm really grateful that we decided to take this kind of journey, and next season's journey will be different. I think we're going to go back to, a more frequent format next season. Don't quote me, but I think we're toying, we're kicking around some things.
I'm quoting you right now.
Quote me.
No, yeah, we did talk about like perhaps changing the format to do so instead of like once a month episodes, we do once a week episodes, but it's the same amount of content. We just chop it up by 4. Whatever. You guys don't care about the administrative stuff. I also thank you for going on this journey with me. It's been super fun. Like it was definitely more challenging to do the show with having these like, you know, in-person events and trying to schedule things around that. But I think it was well worth the challenge. Even if we never recorded any episodes, it was worth it just to visit these places and get these experiences. It was really cool. And like Kayla was saying, if you go and, you know, do something crazy or weird or interesting in your own backyard, we would love to hear about it. So here's one more call to action to come join us on Discord. There's a link in the show notes and also anywhere else we are on the internet. Please come tell us about that stuff. And if you just want to shoot us an email, culturegustweird@gmail.com.
I want to leave us all with a quote from Albert Camus, who had a lot to say about death in his writings, but this is probably the best quote he has about the topic. There is but one freedom, to put oneself right with death. After that, everything is possible. This is Kayla.
And this is Chris.
And this has been
Season 5 of Cult
or Just Weird.